Good morrow, scholars. Welcome back again to Star Wars Return of the Jedi. We are on Chapter 8, page 636. Let's see how many pages we have today. Let's see, 54. Too bad it wasn't 64. Okay. Alright, that's not too bad. It should be about, what, 35 minutes, I think? What time is it? Okay. Admiral Akbar stood on the bridge in stunned disbelief, looking out the observation window at the place where a moment before the rebel star cruiser Liberty had just been engaged in a furious long-range battle. Now there was nothing, only empty space, powdered with fine dust that sparkled in the light of more distant explosions. Akbar stared in silence. Around him, confusion was rampant. Flustered controllers were trying to contact the Liberty, while fleet captains ran from screen to port, shouting, directing, misdirecting. An aide handed Akbar the comlink. General Calrissian's voice was coming through. "Home One, this is Gold Leader. That blast came from the Death Star. Repeat, the Death Star is operational." "We saw it," Akbar answered wearily. "All craft, prepare to retreat." "I'm not going to give up and run," Lando shouted back. He'd come a long way to be in this game. "We have no choice, General Calrissian. Our cruisers can't repel firepower of that magnitude." "You won't get a second chance like this, Admiral. Han will have that shield down. We've got to give him more time. Head for those Star Destroyers." Akbar looked around him. A huge charge of flak rumbled the ship, painting a brief waxen light over the window. Calrissian was right. There would be no second chance. It was now, or it was the end. He turned to his first star captain. "Move the fleet forward." "Yes, sir," the man paused. "Sir, we don't stand much of a chance against those Star Destroyers. They outgun us, and they're more heavily armored." "I know," Akbar said softly. The captain left. An aide approached. "Forward ships have made contact with the Imperial fleet, sir. Concentrate your firepower on their power generators. If we can knock out their shields, our fighters might stand a chance against them." The ship was rocked by another explosion. A laser bolt hit one of the aft gyro stabilizers. "Intensify auxiliary shields," someone yelled. I don't know. The pitch of the battle augmented another notch. Beyond the window of the throne room, the rebel fleet was being decimated in the soulless vacuum of space, while inside, the only sound was the Emperor's thready cackle. Luke continued his spiral into desperation as the Death Star laser beam incinerated ship after ship. The Emperor hissed, "Your fleet is lost, and your friends on the Endor moon will not survive." He pushed a comlink button on the arm of his throne and spoke into it with relish. "Commander Gergerod, should the rebels manage to blow up the shield generator, you will turn this battle station onto Endor and destroy it." "Yes, Your Highness," came the voice over the receiver. "But we have several battalions stationed on—" "You will destroy it," the Emperor's whisper was more final than any scream. "Yes, Your Highness." Palpatine turned back to Luke, the former shaking with glee, the latter with outrage. "There is no escape, my young pupil. The Alliance will die, as will your friends." Luke's face was contorted, reflecting his spirit. Vader watched him carefully, as did the Emperor. The lightsaber began to shake on its resting place. The young Jedi's hand was trembling. His lips pulled back in a grimace, his teeth grinding. The Emperor smiled. "Good. I can feel your anger. I am defenseless. Take your weapon. Strike me down with all of your hatred, and your journey toward the dark side will be complete." He laughed and laughed. Luke was able to resist no longer. The lightsaber rattled violently on the throne a moment, then flew into his hand, impelled by the Force. He ignited it a moment later and swung it with his full weight down toward the Emperor's skull. In that instant, Vader's blade flashed into view, parrying Luke's attack an inch above the Emperor's head. Sparks flew like forging steel, bathing Palpatine's grinning face in a hellish glare. Luke jumped back and turned a lightsaber upraised to face his father. Vader extended his own blade, poised to do battle. Whoops. The Emperor sighed with pleasure and sat in his throne, facing the combatants, the sole audience to this dire, aggrieved contest. Han, Leia, Chewbacca, and the rest of the strike team were escorted out of the bunker by their captors. The sight that greeted them was substantially different from the way the grassy area had appeared when they'd entered. The clearing was now filled with Imperial troops, hundreds of them in white or black armor, some standing at ease, some viewing the scene from atop their two-legged walkers, some leaning on their speeder bikes, as if the situation had appeared hopeless inside the bunker. It looked Even worse now. Han and Leia turned to each other, full of feeling. All they'd struggled for, all they dreamed of, gone now. Even so, they'd had each other for a short while at least. They'd come together from opposite ends of a wasteland of emotional isolation. Han had never known love, so enamored of himself was he. Leia had never known love, so wrapped up in social upheaval was she, so intent on embracing all of humanity. And somewhere between his glassy infatuation for the one and her glowing fervor for the all, they'd found a shady place where the two could huddle, grow, even feel nourished. I'm actually really hungry now. But that too was cut short now. The end seemed near. So much was there to say, they couldn't find a single word. Instead, they only joined hands, speaking through their fingers in these final minutes of companionship. That's when 3PO and R2 jauntily entered the clearing, beeping and jabbering excitedly to each other. They stopped cold in their tracks when they saw what the clearing had become, and found all eyes suddenly focused on them. Oh dear, 3PO whimpered. In a second, he and R2 had turned around and run right back into the woods from which they'd just come. 6 stormtroopers charged in after them. The Imperial soldiers were in time to see the 2 droids stuck behind a large tree some 20 yards into the forest. They rushed after the robots. As they rounded the tree, they found R2, 3PO, and 3PO just standing there, quietly waiting to be taken. The guards moved to take them. They moved too slowly. 15 Ewoks dropped out of the overhanging branches, quickly overpowering the Imperial troops with rocks and clubs. At that, Teebo, perched in another tree, raised a ram's horn to his lips and sounded 3 long blasts from its bell. That was the signal for the Ewoks to attack. Hundreds of them descended upon the clearing from all sides, throwing themselves against the might of the Imperial army with unrestrained zeal. The scene was unabridged chaos. Stormtroopers fired their laser pistols at the furry creatures, killing or wounding many, only to be overrun by dozens more in their place. Oh, that's sad. Biker scouts chased squealing Ewoks into the woods and were knocked from their bikes by volleys of rocks launched from the trees. In the first confused moments of the attack, Chewie dove into the foliage, while Han and Leia hit the dirt and the cover of the arches that flanked the bunker door. Explosions all around kept them pinned from leaving. The bunker door itself was closed again and locked. Han punched out the stolen code on the control panel keys, but this time the door didn't open. It had been reprogrammed as soon as they'd been caught. The terminal doesn't work now, he muttered. Leia stretched for a laser pistol, lying in the dirt just out of reach beside a felled stormtrooper. Shots were crisscrossing from every direction, though. "We need R2, she shouted. Han nodded, took out his comlink, pushed the sequence that signaled the little droid, and reached for the weapon. Leia couldn't get as the fighting stormed all around them. R2 and 3PO were huddled behind a log when R2 got the message. He suddenly blurted out an excited whistle and shot off toward the battlefield. Excuse me. R2, 3PO shouted. Where are you going? Wait for me. Nearly beside himself, the golden droid tore off after his best friend. Biker scouts raced over and around the scurrying droids, blasting away at the Ewoks, who grew fiercer every time their fur was scorched. Little bears were hanging on the legs of Imperial walkers, hobbling the appendages with lengths of vine, or injuring the joint mechanisms by forcing pebbles and twigs into the hinges. They were knocking scouts off their bikes by stringing vines between trees at throat level. They were throwing rocks, jumping out of trees, impaling with spears, entangling with nets. They were everywhere. Scores of them rallied behind Chewbacca, who had grown rather fond of them during the course of the previous night. He'd become their mascot, and they, his little country cousins. So it was with a special ferocity now that they came to each other's aid. Chewie was flinging stormtroopers left and right in a selfless Wookiee frenzy any time he saw them physically harming his small friends. The Ewoks, for their part, formed equally self-sacrificing cadres to do nothing but follow Chewbacca and throw themselves upon any soldier who started getting the upper hand with him. It was a wild, strange battle. It certainly was. R2 and 3PO finally made it into the bunker. Han and Leia provided cover fire with guns they'd finally managed to scrounge. R2 moved quickly to the terminal, plugged in his computer arm, began scanning. Before he'd even computed the weather control or the codes, though a laser bolt explosion ripped the entranceway, disengaging R2's cable arm, spinning him into the dirt. His head began to smolder, his fittings to leak. All of a sudden, every component sprang open, every nozzle gushed or smoked, every wheel spun, and then stopped. 3PO rushed to his wounded companion, and as Han examined the bunker terminal. "Maybe I can hotwire this thing," Solo mumbled. Meanwhile, the Ewoks had erected a primitive catapult at the other side of the field. They fired a large boulder at one of the walkers. The machine vibrated seriously, but did not topple. It turned and headed for the catapult, laser cannon firing. The Ewoks scattered. When the walker was 10 feet away, the Ewoks chopped a mass of restraining vines, and 2 huge balanced trunks crashed down on top of the Imperial war wagon, halting it for good. The next phase of the assault began. Ewoks in kite-like animal skin hang gliders started dropping rocks on the stormtroopers or dive-bombing with spears. Teebo, who led the attack, was hit but in the wing with laser fire during the first volley and crashed into a gnarled root. A charging walker clumped forward to crush him, but Wicket swooped down just in time, yanking Teebo to safety. In swerving out of the walker's way, though, Wicket smashed into a racing speeder bike. They all went tumbling into the dense foliage, and so it went. The casualties mounted. High above it was no different. 1,000 deadly dogfights and cannon bombardments were erupting all over the skies, while the Death Star laser beam methodically disintegrated the rebel ships. In the Millennium Falcon, Lando steered like a maniac through an obstacle course of the giant floating Imperial Star Destroyers, trading laser bolts with them, dodging flak, outracing TIE fighters. Desperately, he was shouting into his comlink over the noise of continuous explosions, talking to Akbar and the Alliance command ship. "I said closer, moving as close as you can to engage the Star Destroyers at point-blank range. That way the Death Star won't be able to fire at us without knocking out its own ships." But no one's ever gone nose-to-nose at that range between super vessels like their destroyers and our cruisers. Akbar fumed at the unthinkable, but their options were running out. "Great!" yelled Lando, skimming over the surface of the destroyer. "Then we're inventing a new kind of combat." "We know nothing about the tactics of such a confrontation," Akbar protested. "We know about as much as they do," Lando hollered. "And they'll think we know more." Bluffing was always dangerous in the last hand, but sometimes when all your money was in the pot, it was the only way to win, and Lando never played to lose. "At that close range, we won't last long against Star Destroyers." Akbar was already feeling giddy with resignation. "We'll last longer than we will against that Death Star, and we might just take a few of them with us," Lando whooped. With a jolt, one of his forward guns was blown away. He put the Falcon into a controlled spin, careening around the belly of the Imperial Leviathan. There we go. With little else to lose, Akbar decided to try Calrissian's strategy. In the next minutes, dozens of rebel cruisers moved in astronomically close to the Imperial Star Destroyers, and the colossal antagonists began blasting away at each other, like tanks at 20 paces, while hundreds of tiny fighters raced across their surfaces, zipping between laser bolts as they chased around in massive hulls. Slowly, Luke and Vader circled, lightsaber high above his head, Luke ready to his attack from classic first position. The Dark Lord held a lateral stance in classic answer. Without announcement, Luke brought down his blade straight down. Then, when Vader moved to parry, Luke feinted and cut low. Later, Vader counter-parried, let the impact direct his sword toward Luke's throat, but Luke met the riposte and stepped back. The first blows traded without injury again. They circled. Vader was impressed with Luke's speed, pleased even. It was a pity almost he couldn't let the boy kill the Emperor yet. Luke wasn't ready for that, emotionally. There was still a chance Luke would return to his friends if he destroyed the Emperor now. He needed more extensive tutelage, first training by both Vader and Palpatine before he'd be ready to assume his place at Vader's right hand, ruling the galaxy. So Vader had to shepherd the boy through periods like this to stop him from doing damage in the wrong places or in the right places prematurely. Before Vader could gather his thoughts much further, though, Luke attacked again, much more aggressively. He advanced in a flurry of lunges, each met with a loud crack of Vader's phosphorescent saber. The Dark Lord retreated a step at every slash, swiveling once to bring his cutting beam up viciously, but Luke batted it away, pushing Vader back yet again. The Dark Lord of the Sith momentarily lost his footing on the stairs and tumbled to his knees. Luke stood above him at the top of the staircase, heady with his own power. It was in his hands now, he knew it was. He could take Vader, take his blade, take his life, take his place at the Emperor's side. Yes, even that. Luke didn't bury the thought this time. He gloried in it. He engorged himself with its juices. Ew. Felt its power tingle his cheeks. It made him feverish, this thought, with a lust so overpowering as to totally obliterate all other considerations. He had the power. The choice was his. And then another thought emerged, slowly, compulsive as an ardent lover. He could destroy the Emperor, too, destroy them both and rule the galaxy, avenge and conquer. It was a profound moment for Luke, dizzying, yet he did not swoon, nor did he recoil. He took a step forward. For the first time, the thought entered Vader's consciousness that his son might best him. He was astounded by the strength Luke had acquired since their last duel in the Cloud City, not to mention the boy's timing, which was honed with a thought's breath. This was an unexpected circumstance, unexpected and unwelcome. Vader felt humiliation crawling in on the tail of his first reaction, which was surprise, and his second, which was fear, and then the edge of the humiliation curled up to reveal bald anger, and now he wanted revenge. These things were mirrored, each facet by the young Jedi who now towered above him. The Emperor, watching joyously, saw this and goaded Luke on to revel in his darkness. Use your aggressive feelings, boy. Yes, let the hate flow through you. Become one with it. Let it nourish you. Luke faltered a moment, then realized what was happening. He was suddenly confused again. What did he want? What should he do? His brief exaltation? His microsecond of dark clarity gone now, and a wash of indecision veiled enigma. Cold awakening from a passionate flirtation. He took a step back, lowered his sword, and relaxed, and tried to drive the hatred from his being. In that instant, Vader attacked. He lunged half up the stairs, forcing Luke to reverse defensively. He bound the boy's blade with his own, but Luke disengaged and leapt to the safety of an overhead gantry. Vader jumped up over the railing to the floor beneath the platform on which Luke stood. "I will not fight you, Father," Luke stated. "You are unwise to lower your defenses," Vader warned. His anger was layered now. He did not want to win if the boy was not battling to the fullest. But if winning meant he had to kill a boy who wouldn't fight, he could do that too, only... He wanted Luke to be aware of those consequences. He wanted Luke to know this was no longer just a game. This was darkness. Luke heard something else, though. "Your thoughts betray you, Father. I feel the good in you, the conflict. You could not bring yourself to kill me before, and you won't destroy me now." Twice before, in fact, to Luke's recollection, Vader could have killed him, but didn't. In the dogfight over the first Death Star, and later in the lightsaber duel on Bespin. He thought of Leia briefly now, too, of how Vader had her in his clutches, had even tortured her, but didn't kill her. He winced to think of her agony, but quickly pushed that from his mind. The point was clear to him now, though so often so murky. There was still good in his father. This accusation really made Vader angry. He could tolerate much from the insolent child, but this was insufferable. He must teach this boy a lesson he would never forget or die learning. "Once again, you underestimate the power of the dark side." Vader threw his scintillating blade. It sliced through the supports holding up the gantry on which Luke was perched, then swept around and flew back into Vader's hand. Luke tumbled to the ground, then rolled down another level under the tilting platform. In the shadow of the darkened overhang, he was out of sight. Vader paced the area like a cat, seeking the boy, but he wouldn't enter the shadows of the overhang. "You cannot hide forever, Luke." "You'll have to come in and get me," replied the disembodied voice. "I will not give you the advantage that easily." Vader felt his intentions increasingly ambiguous in this conflict. The purity of his evil was being compromised. The boy was clever indeed. Vader knew he must move with extreme caution now. "I wish no advantage, Father. I will not fight you. Here, take my weapon." Luke knew full well this might be his end, but so be it. He would not use the darkness to fight darkness. Perhaps it would be left to Leia, after all, to carry on the struggle without him. Perhaps she would know a way he didn't know. Perhaps she could find a path. For now, though, he could only see two paths, and one was into darkness, and one was not. Luke put his lightsaber on the ground and rolled it along the floor toward Vader. It stopped halfway between them in the middle of the low overhead area. The Dark Lord reached out his hand. Luke's lightsaber jumped into it. He hooked it to his belt and with grave uncertainty entered the shadowy overhang. He was picking up additional feelings from Luke now, cross currents of doubt, remorse, regret, abandonment, shades of pain, but somehow not directly related to Vader. To others, to Endor. Ah, that was it. The sanctuary moon where his friends would soon die. Luke would learn soon enough. Friendship was different on the dark side, a different thing altogether. "Give yourself to the dark side, Luke," he entreated. "It is the only way you can save your friends. Yes, your thoughts betray you. Your feelings for them are strong. Especially for..." Vader stopped. He sensed something. Luke withdrew further into the shadow. He tried to hide, but there was no way to hide what was in his mind. Leia was in pain. Her agony cried to him now, and his spirit cried with her. He tried to shut it out, to shut it up, but the cry was loud, and he couldn't stifle it, couldn't leave it alone. Had to cradle it openly, to give it solace. Vader's consciousness invaded that private place. "No!" screamed Luke. Vader was incredulous. "Sister? A sister," he bellowed. "Your feelings have now betrayed her, too. Obi-Wan was wise to hide her from me, but now his failure is complete." His smile was clear to Luke through the mask, through the shadows, through all the realms of darkness. "If you will not turn to the dark side, perhaps she will." This, then, was Luke's breaking point, for Leia was everyone's last unflagging hope. If Vader turned his twisted, misguided cravings on her... "Never!" he screamed. His lightsaber flew off Vader's belt and into his own hand, igniting it as it came to him. He rushed to his father with a frenzy he'd never known, nor had Vader. The gladiators battled fiercely, sparks flying from the clash of their radiant weapons, but it was soon evident that the advantage was all Luke's, and he was pressing it. They locked swords, body to body. When Luke pushed Vader back to break the clinch, the Dark Lord hit his head on an overhang beam in the cramped space. He stumbled backward even further out of the low-hanging area. Luke pursued him relentlessly. Blow upon blow, Luke forced Vader to retreat back onto the bridge that crossed the vast, seemingly bottomless shaft to the power core. Each stroke of Luke's saber pummeled Vader like accusations, like screams, like shards of hate. The Dark Lord was driven to his knees. He raised his blade to block yet another onslaught, and Luke slashed Vader's right hand off at the wrist. The hand, along with bits of metal, wires, and electronic devices, clattered uselessly away while Vader's lightsaber tumbled over the edge of the span into the endless shaft below without a trace. Luke stared at his father's twitching, severed, mechanical hand, and then at his own black-gloved, artificial part, and realized suddenly just how much he'd become like his father, like the man he hated. Trembling, he stood above Vader, to the point of his glowing blade at the Dark Lord's throat. He wanted to destroy this thing of darkness, this thing that was once his father, this thing that was him. Suddenly, the Emperor was there, looking on, chuckling, with uncontrollable, pleased agitation. "Good, kill him. Your fate has... Hate has made you powerful. Now fulfill your destiny and take your father's place at my side." Luke stared at his father beneath him, then at the Emperor, then back at Vader. This was darkness, and it was the darkness he hated, not his father, not even the Emperor, but the darkness in them and in himself. And the only way to destroy the darkness was to renounce it for good and all. This has nothing to do with supernatural. He stood suddenly erect and made the decision for which he'd spent his life in preparation. He hurled his lightsaber away. Never will I turn to the dark side. You have failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi, as my father before me." The Emperor's glee turned to a sullen rage. "So be it, Jedi. If you will not be turned, you will be destroyed." Palpatine raised his spidery arms towards Luke, blinding white bolts of energy coruscated, I don't know, from his fingers, shot across the room like sorcerous lightning, and tore through the boy's insides, looking for ground. The young Jedi was at once confounded and in agony. He'd never heard of such a power, such a corruption of the Force, let alone experienced it. But if it was force-generated, it could be force-repelled. Luke raised his arms to deflect the bolts. Initially, he was successful. The lightning rebounded from his touch harmlessly into the walls. Soon, though, the shocks came with such speed and power they coursed over and into him, and he could only shrink before them, convulsed with pain, his knees buckling, his powers at ebb. Vader crawled like a wounded animal to his Emperor's side. On Endor, the battle of the bunker continued. Stormtroopers kept irradiating Ewoks with sophisticated weaponry, while the fuzzy little warriors bashed away at the Imperial troops with clubs, tumbled walkers with log piles, and vine trip wires, lassoed speeder bikes with vine ropes and net traps. They felled trees on their foes. They dug pits, which they covered with branches, and then lured the walkers into to chase them until the clumsy armored vehicles toppled into the dugouts. They started rock slides. They dammed a small nearby stream and then opened the floodgates, deluging a host of troops and 2 more walkers. They ganged up and then ran away. They jumped on top of the walkers from high branches and poured pouches of burning lizard oil in the gun slits. They used knives and spears and slings and made scary war shrieks to confound and dismay the enemy. They were fearless opponents. Their example made even Chewbacca bolder than was his wont. He started having so much fun swinging on vines and bashing heads, he nearly forgot about his laser pistol. He swung onto the roof of the walker at one point, with Teebo and Wicket clinging to his back. They landed with a thud atop the lurching contraption, then made such a banging racket, trying to hang on. One of the stormtroopers inside... Wait, what? Trying to hang on. Okay, there we go. One of the stormtroopers inside opened the top hatch to see what was happening. Before he could fire his gun, Chewie plucked him out and dashed him to the ground. Wicket and Teebo immediately dove into the hatch and subdued the other trooper. Ewoks drive an Imperial walker much the way they drive speeder bikes, terribly, but with acceleration. Chewie was almost thrown off the top several times, but even barking angrily down into the cockpit didn't seem to have much effect. The Ewoks just giggled and squealed and careened into another speeder bike. Chewie climbed down inside. It took him half a minute to master the controls. Imperial technology was pretty standardized, and then methodically, one by one, he began approaching the other unsuspecting Imperial walkers and blasting them to dust. Most had no idea what was happening. As the giant war machines began going up in flames, the Ewoks were re-inspired. They rallied behind Chewie's walker. The Wookiee was turning the tide of the battle. Han, meanwhile, was still working furiously at the control panel. Wires sparked each time he refastened another connection, but the door kept not opening. Leia crouched at his back, firing her laser pistol, giving him cover. He motioned her at last. "Give me a hand. I think I've got it figured out. Hold this." He handed her one of the wires. She holstered her weapon, took the wire he gave her, and held it in position as he brought 2 others from opposite ends of the panel. "Here goes nothing." The 3 wires sparked. The connection was made. Then there was a sudden whoomp as a second blast. A door crashed down in front of the first, doubling the impregnable barrier. "Great, now we have 2 doors to get through," Leia muttered. At that moment, she was hit in the arm by a laser bolt and knocked to the ground. Han rushed over to her. "Leia, no," he cried, trying to stop the bleeding. "Princess Leia, are you all right?" 3PO fretted. "It's not bad," she shook her head. "It's..." "Hold it," shouted a voice. "One move and you're both dead." They froze, looked up. 2 stormtroopers stood before them, weapons leveled, unwavering. "Stand up," one ordered, hands raised. Han and Leia looked at each other, fixed their gazes deep in each other's eyes, swam there in the wells of their souls for a suspended eternal moment during which all was felt, understood, touched, and shared. Solo's gaze was drawn down to Leia's holster. She surreptitiously eased out her gun and was holding it now at the ready. The action was hidden from the troopers because Han was standing in front of Leia, half blocking their view. He looked again into her eyes, comprehending with a last heartfelt smile. He whispered, "I love you, I know," she answered simply. Then the moment was over, and at an unspoken instantaneous signal, Han whirled out of the line of fire as Leia blasted the stormtroopers. The air was filled with laser fire. A glinting orange-pink haze, like an electron storm, buffeted the area, sheared by intense flares. As the smoke cleared, a giant Imperial walker approached, stood before them, and stopped. Han looked up to see its laser cannons aimed directly in his face. He raised his arms and took a tentative step forward. He wasn't really sure what he was going to do. "Stay back," he said quietly to Leia, measuring the distance between to the machine in his mind. That was when the hatch on top of the walker popped open, and Chewbacca stuck his head out with an ingratiating smile. I don't know, barked the Wookiee. Solo could have kissed him. "Chewie, get down here. She's wounded." He started forward to greet his partner, then stopped in mid-stride. "No, wait, I've got an idea." "Okay, cool." "Oh, and cool, under 30 minutes. Nice. Okay, I'm going to charge my phone before I have to go to work today, because that would be a good idea. Thank you guys for watching. We have 1 chapter left. Look at that. Look at that. Look. How awesome is that? I can't wait for the movie tomorrow. I'm so excited, and I can't hide it. I wish I had my lightsabers with me. I'm gonna go get them. Anyway, until next time, goodbye everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed the movie. Let me know if you want to see a review.